we're really excited to have four incredible women from four different jobs and four very different career paths here to share with us their advice, but also their experiences. And so before we dive into the questions that were submitted by folks during registration, I would like to have each of our panelists give a brief introduction to let us know who they are and what their experience has been so far. So we'll start with Abby.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me today to be part of the panel. So my name's Abby Neeson. I graduated with my PhD from the University of California, Davis just 2 years ago. So I was in those graduate school shoes very recently. And then I currently, the past 2 years, have been working at Exponent, which is a science and consulting company. My role is a senior engineer in the biomechanics practice. And in that role, I evaluate injury claims in various types of accidents, including automotive, occupational, and recreational.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mary.
Hi, my name is Mary. Thank you so much for having me here today. So I currently live in Chicago, Illinois. I work remotely for a company called OrthoFix, but I started out doing my PhD in biomedical engineering from Northwestern. I did a postdoc at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, and then I work remotely at OrthoFix now.
Kristen, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen. Thank you again just for having me. I'm excited to meet some of you and connect with more international women in biomechanics. But my background is in mechanical engineering originally. I went to a smaller school on the east coast of Canada, University of New Brunswick, and realized I hated machines, so had to figure out how to sort of pivot it into something that would be a more enjoyable career. So that's how I kind of fell into biomechanics. But ended up doing a master's at McGill in a sports engineering lab. And now I'm working at Lululemon as a research scientist, working on, product innovation and developing apparel.
Thank you. And Shannon, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. Also very excited to be here and just share some of our input and experiences. So I'm from Toronto originally. I did an undergrad in, similar to Kristen, mechanical engineering, and then I eventually went on to do a master's in with specialization in biomechanical. So my master's was at the Human Mobility Research Lab based out of Hotel Dieu in Kingston, Ontario. I was specifically researching knee osteoarthritis and unloader braces. Eventually was kind of looking to get out of academia just for some, personal interest. And so eventually I found my current position, which is at AMTI, who manufactures biomechanics force platforms. So I was familiar with their equipment from my time in my master's. I used their force plates and treadmill, which was kind of convenient. So I then switched into a sales position, kind of a sales engineering position. So I was based out of Boston for 4 years, and now I'm on the West Coast near San Diego, and I work remotely still for AMTI.
Awesome. So thank you all for giving us that introduction. I do have a list of questions that I've consolidated from our members as they were registering, but I also want to encourage folks on the call, if you have follow-up questions or want to have clarification on something that one of our panelists says, please throw it in the chat and I will be keeping an eye on that as we go through and answer these questions. So oftentimes when we, and I want to start by just listing off that we have a really wide variety of folks in our call right now, from student all the way up to fully into their career. So folks who may be deciding what they're going to do, what they're going to change, if they want to stay in academia, if they want to go into industry. And so part of the purpose of this panel, and you'll notice that all of our panelists today are folks who've left academia And so I want to start by just asking what your decision was as you were deciding between staying in academia, leaving academia, going into industry, and what maybe motivated that choice.
I can go first. I just made the pivot 3 months ago to industry. So
How are you? I'm good.
So I originally thought I wanted to stay in academia. Like I said, did my PhD. It was in biomedical engineering. And I studied like motor learning during walking, so doing some biomechanics there. And I had this plan to study like psychosocial factors in walking and how those relate to like biomechanical factors. And so that was my original plan, and I even applied to a second postdoc after my original postdoc, thinking that I want to do something like a little more training before going into a professor role. And I applied to a postdoc and the application process went really well. Like I got the offer, but they offered me like a 20K less than I was currently making in my salary. And I hate that that was the reason that it's not the reason I pivoted, but it's the reason I started thinking about other opportunities because I'm single and like I couldn't really afford to start to do that type of role. And I started like also applying to other positions and just starting to talk with people in industry and see like what else was out there at the same time of writing a grant. But yeah, it was really I started talking to people in industry and everyone just seemed like really happy in their roles and like there was a lot of area for growth and like promotions and there were a lot of different opportunities out there that I could apply like my skill set. And the other thing about academics, I think for me was that you had to do a lot of different things. And I kind of wanted to focus in on like what I felt like my strengths were, which were like science communication. And so yeah, that led me to looking into medical writing. And yeah, I think that I'm really happy so far with my career choice. And it's definitely a better lifestyle for me. And just I'm able to kind of focus in on exactly what I wanted to do with my career. So yeah.
I can follow up just on my experience. Yeah, I think, like I said, I did my undergraduate in mechanical engineering and I didn't get a ton of experience. I was interested in the biomechanical side of things. I always had a background, like I played on the Queen's volleyball team, had a background in sports. And so I had kind of the interest in that side of things as opposed to just the hardcore engineering route. And so the master's was interesting to me because I got more specialization in the biomechanics side of engineering. I think that just personally, I kind of, the project that I did in my master's of knee osteoarthritis and unloader braces kind of fell into my lap a little bit. Was it, something that I was super interested in? Not necessarily. And so I think that might have been partly why I was looking outside of academia, just because I wasn't, super bought into the project that I was working on. And there were opportunities to, move into a PhD, but I don't think I was invested enough. And so honestly, once my master's was coming to an end, I really was just looking at all different avenues of jobs. I have a lot of family in the pharmaceutical sales. So I was looking I remember having a list of like 50 different companies and types of positions that I was just sifting through. And this one just kind of made sense. I had, the experience with the equipment. I think that I had a connection from AMTI who had worked with one of my supervisors in my master's. And I've found it really interesting so far. I think that one of my favorite parts of my job is getting kind of little tidbits of all different types of projects that people are doing with the equipment, whether it's researching cerebral palsy or something on the clinical side, or I also led the development of instrumented pitching mounds, which are now getting purchased by Major League Baseball teams and things like that, which, like I said, I have a background in sports. So that was really interesting to me. So I think that it's interesting to have kind of not knowing what call I'm going to get that day of which project is going to come up. And it kind of keeps me on my toes, which I really appreciate about the job.
I think I'm kind of on a similar wavelength of Shannon in that I wasn't necessarily all into the idea of continuing in academia. And I was given the advice early on that if you aren't feeling all in on a PhD, it's best not to go there. So yeah, also sort of was open to all types of opportunities after the master's. But I think during the master's, I worked with a couple of companies that were more in sort of the soft goods department. So the lab I worked at did a lot of work with Bauer, which is a company that makes hockey equipment. So it was a big thing for Canada and Montreal, where I was. But that was like the first opening to what I realized that, wait, these companies in industry that are making consumer products are actually heavily relying on academic research, and they are hiring people with academic backgrounds to do this type of research, but also to help facilitate partnerships with academic industries and working on a lot of data interpretation. So taking these like tougher scientific oriented papers and figuring out how we can apply it to a business and how we can apply it to merchandisers and designers who do not come from that world. And so when I realized that was sort of an opportunity, I think I made the link that I think I like this more communication and translating. And yeah, so that's really how I decided to do industry instead of academia.
All right, I can wrap it up with my experience. So similar to Shannon, my project pretty much fell on my lap when I started my PhD, and it wasn't something I was super interested in, but it was also total knee replacement. I really enjoyed learning about it for 5 years, but then I was sort of ready to move on to the next thing. And so I had worked in consulting prior to grad school, and I knew that it would give me a basis to work on a multitude of projects rather than be sort of honed in on one long-term project. So currently I work on probably about 5 projects a week. So they're much smaller scale. It allows for a lot of learning and sort of expanding my biomechanics expertise beyond the knee to the whole body, which is, one of the draws that I had to this role. But one of the other things I wanted to do was just in my PhD, I worked primarily alone, like independently, and I was craving being part of a team environment again. And so IWB was really instrumental in like forming during my PhD and helping give me that community. But I still knew in my industry role I wanted to be joining, a team environment, and not in a postdoc or a professorship. Just sounded a little bit too isolated for what I was looking for. And then similar to what a lot of people said before with sort of what skill sets you can apply to industry, I would say science communication is a big one in my industry. My clients are lawyers. They don't understand science, or they think they do. And so my job is to take those technical papers and teach them the science. So I looked into medical writing as well. I know that was brought up. One of the reasons why I didn't go into that is I was told you can't do math. Somebody told me if you want to divide 2 numbers, you're not allowed to do that. And I was like, I need math in my life. So my role allows me to do science communication with math.
Well, that was really cool to hear everyone's sort of different take on what made them choose the path that they're on. And then in addition to that, we learned a little bit more about what your background is and what skills you carried in from your PhD or from your master's research. And so I'm curious, how did you communicate those academic and research skills that you developed during your education effectively when you were applying to these relatively non-research roles? And I've heard scientific communication brought up, but I'm curious what other skills you brought to the table and how you communicated that those were assets to the company you're with now.
I can just go ahead. Sorry, I might be taking a little bit of a turn on the question you're asking specifically, but I've also been part of kind of the hiring team, in my time at AMTI as well. And I think it's been kind of an eye-opening experience being on the hiring side of things, because at least for a technical sales position, we definitely value people that have experience with biomechanical equipment, whether that's motion capture systems, EMG, force plates, like things like that. That's kind of honestly a bonus. I think at least in our position, it's really important that we have people that can collaborate as a team and communicate well with customers. I think that we've met with a fair number of people that certainly have the background and expertise in, on the technical side of things. But at least when you're in a technical sales position, you really do need to have the balance. You don't want to have someone who's too technical and they can't really have the salesy kind of communication with customers. But at the same time, we also couldn't really go with like a car salesman who's just going to say, give me 3 lines that I can sell to any customer with. The people we're dealing with half the time are people who have PhDs, masters, like they know what they're talking about and they're looking for guidance, and they really can see through it if you don't know what you're talking about. So it's kind of been interesting. I think it really just goes to show, if you see a posting that says, it would be beneficial to have this technical or background or expertise in these systems, still put your name out there, because sometimes people are going through resumes and they're, it says all the right things, but just it's not a match necessarily in the personality and the communication skills. So it's definitely worthwhile putting your name out there. And I can't say it enough, but having experience doing interviews, just getting comfortable talking about yourself and things like that is always an added benefit. So
Awesome. That was a great flip on the question.
Yeah, sorry.
Sort of the opposite of what you would like people to communicate
right,
in their interviews.
I can speak on this as well. So, one thing I did was I sent my resume to a lot of different people. One of the things to help get a job was talking to like many people. I talked to over 70 people over the last year, trying to understand like the scope of what's out there. In industry, and then also just trying to understand, like, once I decided on medical writing, like how to get a job in medical writing. So I sent my resume to a lot of people, or anyone who was willing to take a look at it, who was already in industry, to give me feedback on like just to give me any sort of feedback on it, and particularly like how to communicate my skills. Some of the skills that I really focused on were like project management, like interdisciplinary work, which is called like cross-functional teams in industry. And then like for the writing part, I actually tailored my LinkedIn to say medical writer, because someone was like, you already are a medical writer. Like, don't even write like medical writer, like aspiring medical writer. Like, you already write medical documents and things like that. I put biomedical engineer, or I put maybe medical writer first and then biomedical engineer. So I wasn't like lying, because I did lots of writing, but it kind of just like encouraged people to think like, okay, she knows what she's doing, like this is what she wants. And that was another way that I communicated my skills. And then I think also just like leadership and the clinical twist on like being a biomedical engineer and having that clinical experience. I think all those were ways that I communicated my experience. So.
I think that's similar to what Mary just touched upon, is like the aspect of informational interviews. So I had no idea what type of role to go into, or like that I wanted to go into. And so about a year and a half before graduating, or like my target graduation date, I started reaching out to people to set up like monthly calls, like trying to interview a different person every month, and just ask them about their job, what skills they used from their graduate work in their current day-to-day, and then try to pair like, okay, what things do I like doing and what things do I not like doing, to hone in on what would be a good fit. And the more you talk to people, the more you'll learn like the industry lingo, as Mary was also alluding to, because I think that can be hard when you first start to understand what the terminology is. And I would say that's the biggest thing when crafting your resume, is to use the terminology that the people looking at it are going to be familiar with. So definitely reach out to your network, get feedback on your resume. I found that I really enjoyed doing things like, reading technical papers and summarizing them. And so that's something that I do a lot in my current job, is just going on the internet and conducting literature reviews and seeing what papers I can find that are relevant to the work that I'm working on. So you want to make sure you're tailoring it to your interests and your needs, and then like honing in. The other thing I learned is that, at least in the field I'm in, like the levels for like medical device companies, staff engineer is above senior engineer, which I was very confused about. So it goes like engineer, senior engineer, senior staff engineer, then like principal. That's like a very typical structure that you'll see. So that was something that I had to learn, and I didn't know.
Think all of these answers have been amazing. I feel like I'm learning a lot if I ever want to pivot. But yeah, great answers so far. I think like the only thing that I could add is I think marketing yourself as a unique person is also really important, in the sense that thinking about how your maybe personal interests or personal hobbies or personal background could align with the company is something that I think can help set you apart. And I guess what I mean by that is, if there are so many biomechanics jobs, everyone with a biomechanics background could be applying, but certain people are definitely going to be a better fit than others. And maybe that comes out in some of those extra interests. So I always loved like knitting and sewing. And so I never would have highlighted that on other job applications. But when I was applying to a apparel company, I decided to highlight that. And I submitted not only my resume, but also a little portfolio, but it wasn't a regular design portfolio. I had portfolios of like patterns I had designed and like clothes that I had sewn. And so later on, they told me that was one of the reasons that they were interested in me. So I think like also trying to bring things that make you unique and things that you're genuinely passionate about across will really make you stand out in trying to get into competitive industries.
Wow, that was awesome to hear, and very cool about the design portfolio. And one of my main takeaways was just talk to people and ask, what are you looking for in your industry, and how do I stand out with my skills relative to what you're looking for? So definitely talking to folks. Within talking to folks and really taking advantage of the network that you have and building the network up, what strategies did you find helped you to find that first position in your desired field, and how did networking play a role?
I don't have anything crazy here. I mean, I did have kind of, I want to say 1.5 supervisors for my master's, and the one that was kind of partially involved, he had worked with my current boss previously at the Spalding Running Clinic in Boston. So that was convenient. But I also found out after the fact that I think my supervisor had asked another person who was in the industry to put in a good word. And I didn't even really know that until after I got the job. So definitely networking is huge. And, another thing that I've, not necessarily something I experienced, but what I've seen happen is people interviewing, and if they don't get that one job, maybe another position opens up at the company later on, or that person goes elsewhere into a similar position and they remember you. Maybe they couldn't hire you at the last place, but they remember your name. So it's just super advantageous to like have those connections with people, and it definitely is only going to help you down the road.
Yeah, again, I think nothing groundbreaking here, but just that the longer I'm in industry, the more I realize how important networking is. And I know I feel like I've been told that for so long, but it was almost it's hard to almost get your foot in the door with making those first few connections. And I think grad school and things like this and conferences are truly the way to get your foot in the door, to just meet one or two people from the industry you're interested in, and then go from there. But yeah, it is really tough to start. And I don't necessarily think I have any more advice other than just like introduce yourself to people.
Yeah, again, like I just moved into industry, so I have some recent experience with this. I had no industry connections when I decided that I wanted to start looking at other opportunities. And so oftentimes I think people think that you have to have the connections already, and you really don't. You can make the connections yourself. The way I did that was I started by looking on LinkedIn at second connections of people that were medical writers or just in industry. I like looked through my connections, and you can just search like, you can like click second connections and search like medical writer, whatever word you want, or job topic you want. And then yeah, it happened to just be a good skill to have, was like figuring out how to find these people to network with. But then I only had to have a few people to start networking with before I started asking the question in my like half hour, 15-minute informational interviews. Like, do you have anyone else you'd recommend that I talk to? And that was like really key to getting so many people who had connections and who were like higher up in their careers, not just like people who were entry level, who were kind of more the connections that I started out with. And then, yeah, it was through like the 68th person that I talked to who happened to like know someone who sent my resume to like her friend who is not my boss. And so it, again, you probably don't have to interview that many people, but for me, it took that much to find a job. And I didn't frame it when I was like talking to people that I'm looking for a job. I framed it as like, can you just tell me about your role and like about your day to day? And I had a few like lists of questions that I wanted to ask them about like their job and like how they got to where they were, and things like that. And yeah, I have this huge network of people now in medical writing and just in industry in general that I can kind of fall back on in the future, if I ever need to. So I think that, yeah, that was a really positive experience.
My networking strategy was pretty targeted. I reached out to previous grad students from my lab, as well as previous graduate students from my graduate group. So people who had been in industry for maybe like 2+ years at least, so that they would have sort of like a lot of wealth of information to share. And doing it that way, I felt like I already had so many people to talk to, and people were more likely to respond to my email because we already shared an instant connection of being from the same either lab or graduate group. So really honing in on like those shared commonalities, I think, is important to get people to respond to you, because I'm sure I get a lot of requests. And so it's nice to know why people specifically are reaching out to me in particular, rather than just being another person, on their list. My current job I got though from sending a cold email to my current manager. It took like 2 weeks to get a response, but that's okay. And so my advice is that when you are trying to build your network, don't take it personally if people don't respond or if they don't have time. One of the biggest turnoffs that I have is when someone reaches out to me, I don't have time at the moment, but I'm still willing to talk to them maybe next month when things cool down, and then it just trickles off. And so don't let it trickle off. Keep the conversation warm, like keep in touch, wait a couple weeks, respond again, and I promise it's more likely to happen if you just keep trying.
I'm a big fan of a cold email. So with the kind of variety that we have in PhD and masters, I want to also get your insight onto what you think there might be for pros and cons of pursuing that PhD before you transition to industry, or if there's a benefit to doing your PhD knowing that you're going to transition into industry, and how you might tailor your education, research, and experiences towards that goal, or advice you would have if you could do it over again.
Yeah, just I guess at least at my company, pretty much everyone that's in the sales position has a master's, but not a PhD. I can't say that we necessarily veto people who have a PhD for any reason out of the position if we're looking to hire or fill or anything like that. But most of the people that have PhDs at our company are more in like the design engineering role, chief science officer, kind of things like that. So they're really into the nitty-gritty details of the engineering and the product development and patents and things like that. Whereas on the sales side of things, like I guess we're not necessarily looking for someone with a PhD. And if anything, we might need to really hone in on confirming that the communication skills are there and things like that, just because there is so much development that has gone into the technical side of things when you have a PhD, especially if someone's coming out specifically of the PhD and they don't have any experience in like another type of position. Again, not that we're vetoing that necessarily. Obviously, there's benefits to having the technical side of things, but it does need to pair with like the ability to like transfer those skills and be able to communicate them effectively to customers and things like that.
I can go next. So a PhD is required for my position, and that's one of the things I have to tell people when they reach out and they're interested. But a caveat to that is that a PhD is not required for my position at a competitor company. So Exponent's a little unique in that for the biomechanics practice, they do want the the incoming role to have a PhD. So I would say it really just when I was searching for a job, I think having a PhD felt more like a burden than like a useful thing to have. It doesn't mean that it's always a burden. I wouldn't have my current role without it. So I can't say I regret getting it. I do think I learned a lot of really valuable skills in completing my PhD. But I don't think it's necessary for industry roles. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to even if you're currently in a PhD program and you see roles you're excited for, you can always sort of transition earlier, or whatever your goals are. Just make sure that they're aligned with the education you're pursuing.
Yeah, I don't think I agree with what Abby said. I don't think it's necessary to have, or it's definitely not necessary to have a PhD to get into industry. But for my role, it is necessary. For medical writing, a lot of the roles are PhD, or you have to have a PhD. That was one of the reasons I was interested in medical writing because I wanted to jump into something where they were looking for PhDs and not someone with like 5 years of experience because I didn't have that. And often a lot of roles will look for that. But yeah, I think I wouldn't like shy away from doing the PhD if you like research and that's what you're into at the moment. But going into doing a PhD just to go into industry, I think you might want to know like why you're doing that. And really figure that out because it's not impossible to get into industry with a PhD, but they're definitely, like Shannon was saying, there's a little bit of like some barriers with feeling like you're overqualified, but yeah, underqualified at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah, from my experience, kind of echoing what everyone has said already, specifically in my team, there is no requirement to have a PhD or not. I would say we're a really sort of healthy mix of just masters or PhDs. And what I have observed though is that sometimes I think some of the more entry-level positions, they come up more frequently. And so just because when you get into higher positions, then you're starting to compete with more like internal hires and that kind of stuff. So again, even if you're applying for roles, they may be doing internal hires. So it shouldn't sort of deter you, or you shouldn't be discouraged if you're not getting responses from some of those roles that are at the PhD level, just because they may be hiring internally. But what I've found is that to get your foot in the door, you sometimes do need to take these sort of entry-level positions that might seem sort of below a PhD. But what I have observed is that people that have PhDs and take those roles grow really quickly, because I think the company understands the value of a PhD, but they truly are sometimes constrained by like headcount and numbers when you're at a big corporation. And so sometimes, yeah, just like the leadership on our team sees the value and recognizes that it is work experience and that you are sort of that much, you have that much work experience, but it's just hard to get your foot in the door sometimes. So yeah, I've noticed people with PhDs can grow quite fast in industry.
I have a quick follow-up question for Abby. To just understand, Shreya has seen a few roles pop up at Exponent specifically for master's degrees that are these research engineer and assistant roles. And can you just speak to a little bit of how competitive that pool of candidates might be, and how to leverage these roles when they're posted? If you can speak to that.
Sure. So yeah, I'm reading the question right now. But I don't actually know how much influence referrals have in those roles. I think that in general, a lot of the work that those roles would do falls into a totally different side of Exponent than the one that I'm involved in. So just to sort of break it down, there's reactive work, which is the litigative work I work on, and then proactive work, which is where Exponent does like partners with big tech companies or, you know, medical device manufacturers to help them develop new products, and make sure that, you know, they're safe, they're accurate. And so these research engineer assistant roles would be on that proactive side. And so I think that if there's a specific role that you're interested in, Shreya, I'm happy to chat with you about it. I can take a look to see who the hiring manager is for those roles. But I think that I don't know too much about it, so it would be a little bit easier if we just spoke maybe off the call.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Abby.
Yeah.
And then we have two questions that I'm going to combine a little bit into one, which is that as we are doing our master's degrees and our PhDs and going through graduate research, we're gaining a lot of experience, but it's not necessarily experience that easily translates to industry. And so Donika and Maliha were curious if you had any insights into doing internships while you're in your graduate program, as people who would potentially be hiring those interns, what you might be looking for and what would be your preferences in terms of timing, whether that would be in person, remote, part-time, you come all the time in the summer. If you have any insight into that.
I can also speak on that. I did an internship. It was basically right after I defended my PhD. So I did an internship at Stryker in their knee division. It was a small group of mostly PhDs who are developing in the advanced technology developing models section. And it was so instrumental in, again, helping form connections, just learning about the industry. I highly recommend internships. So whether you're in your first year of grad school or undergrad, through, you know, you're already graduated, don't turn down an internship. Like, even if you're graduated, take internships. They're incredibly helpful. And even at the PhD level, they are super relevant. My particular role doesn't offer internships, or my company doesn't offer internships in my current office, but I would encourage you to, you know, look on LinkedIn and apply to them and see if you can do them for a summer or a semester or whatnot. Even if you have to take a step away from your research for a summer, it's well worth it.
And then we have another question in the chat. Would you be willing to share some general insight into typical salary ranges or the types of benefits that are offered at these types of positions. And then because industry and academia, the hiring processes are quite different. What are some of those benefits that are negotiable, and what kinds of things do you necessarily recommend folks try to negotiate as they're making that transition into industry?
At least from a sales perspective, I would say that the entry level salaries maybe ranged from 65,000 to 75,000 US per year, kind of depending on experience and background and things like that. Definitely with the potential for pretty quick raises based on performance. So it's not to say that you're, stuck for 10 years or whatever that salary. If you are a high performer and you really demonstrate yourself, I think that companies that are, dynamic companies that are, driven to succeed definitely will value that and see it and take advantage and promote quickly. But at the same time, I've been fed my entire life, like you're not gonna get things you don't ask for. So it's definitely good practice to find the voice to be able to advocate for yourself for what you think you're worth. At least in the US, the vacation side of things is very interesting compared to the rest of the world. I think vacation when I first started was 2 weeks, which I was flabbergasted about, and really only went up to 3 weeks, which isn't a lot. I know a lot of people that Canadian friends that starting salaries at their companies are 4 weeks. I think my sister worked in the UK for a while. It was 6 weeks there. So it kind of does depend on where you're coming from that perspective. But I think things like that are certainly open to negotiation. And if you're you get a little bit of insight into the manager or whoever you'd be working with, if they're super thrown and disgusted by you even asking that, then that's telling of whether or not you want to work at that company with that person. So I think if you approach it in the right way, there's certainly room to at least have that conversation. Whether or not you get it off the bat, it at least shows that that's something that's valuable to you. So if you do perform, within the first 6 months, then maybe they're going to be more likely to follow up and, give you some of those things, quickly into the role.
Thank you. And I love that of you're not just going to be given things that you don't ask for, especially at work. So it is always nice to remember to ask, but I do want to be mindful of the time. And I do have one last question for everyone. And this is maybe a little bit of a challenging question, but what is a piece of advice that you would give to someone trying to learn about variety of career paths that they haven't heard before? And this is tough because you've already given so much incredible advice just in the last hour. But if there's anything on here that you haven't gotten to say yet or share yet, or something that you think we would all really benefit from hearing.
I'll just say quickly, I think something that I have found interesting is I've heard a few experiences from people and kind of had this experience myself, like where there's a certain job posting, and it's kind of written from a certain perspective. I have a friend who has a biomechanics background, and there was a job posting at the New York Mets for like an analyst type position. And he went through a really rigorous interview process there, and they actually ended up kind of making his position into something that would like they really liked him. They liked his background. Did he fit the exact cookie cutter of what they were picturing for that position? No, but they saw like value in what he could bring, and they actually kind of made a position that was like a little bit of a hybrid. And I think similarly, like in my position at AMTI, I started out as like a lot of sales and support and have morphed a little bit more into like sales and marketing, just from like interest and, I don't know. I've always found, the Adobe suite and that kind of whole side of things really interesting. And AMTI is a small company with only 25 people. So really at small companies, you wear a lot of hats for sure. So you kind of have to be open to being a team player and adapting. But the role will kind of morph into your strengths and things like that. So just goes to say, again, if you see a posting that you're like, I meet some of these things, but not others, like just get your name out there. They might be finding it more difficult than you realize to fill the position, and they're open to chatting with you, and then they realize that you could bring a lot to the table, and they'll adapt the position to bring you on. So
Yeah, I think for me, I got some mentors early on through like career centers at both University of Rochester where I went to undergrad and Northwestern where I went to grad school. And oftentimes, I mean, I don't know if this is the case for everywhere, but at least both those places that I went, there's like alumni, resources and or if you're still a student at the university, opportunities for career development. And so that was really the people I talked to were like a product manager and like someone else in a different position. But that was where I started, and they were able to kind of guide me to different opportunities and other areas of jobs that I could look into. So that was kind of where I started, and then talking to all those people. Again, like yeah, you don't need to have that network. You can really make it as long as you are willing to kind of put yourself out there a little bit. Yeah.
I think as well, there's no harm in pivoting at any point in your career. I feel like um the more I am in my current role, the more I'm meeting people from totally different areas of the business, in areas that I didn't know existed. And it's nice that I'm continually sort of making those connections and learning about these new roles that is totally not my background at all. A lot of these people come from business or from like they went to fashion school or something like that. And what I appreciate is that I think you can just pivot at any time, truly. And sometimes it doesn't need to be going back to school. It's like, what skills have I learned in this role that would help me in another role, maybe within the same company, but just in a totally different field? And I've seen actually a few of my team members that came from academic backgrounds. A friend who's a physiologist just hopped over to a brand marketing type of role. And so she is now collecting data from all different types of sources, but trying to figure out like how is the brand going to take a stance on this issue? What do people want for the future in this sort of area? And so she's taking those skills that she learned in the product innovation space and in her physiology degree, but she never would have gotten there without going through a certain path. So just don't be afraid, I think, to take pivots at any point in your career.
I was just gonna say, I think one of the things I've learned from my own experiences that I share with people is that a lot of people get stuck in thinking that they first apply and then they make the connection like during the interview process or by reaching out to the hiring manager saying, I applied to this job, I'm really interested. And in my experience, it's been the opposite. I have always made my connections first and basically had the offer in hand. And then they're like, oh, wait, you need to apply. Here's the link. So in my experience, you don't need to worry so much about applying for the job. It really is about like, forget what you see, posted online. It really is about the networking and the connection. So don't think that you have to apply to get the offer, because I can tell you, you can get the offer and then apply.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Let's all take a moment to thank our panelists for their time and also for the incredible advice that they gave us.